AfriCanDo. My name is Estelle Youssoufa and I'm thrilled to be your host for this live debate. I'm also very pleased to welcome you here in this beautiful Mohamed VI University Polytechnic that's near Marrakesh for the Atlantic Dialogues that's organized every year by the Policy Center for the New South, which works on key economic and international issues with a Southern perspective. As you know, the Atlantic Dialogues bring together 350 high-level officials, academics, business leaders, and emerging leaders. They are key talents which are committed to renew the transatlantic relations. Now, among the topics that will be discussed during the Atlantic Dialogues, AfriCanDo picked the demographic challenges. You might know that Europe and China are aging, while Africa, our continent, has the fastest growing population in the world. Now, demographics has huge monumental consequences, both on politics, the economics, and the environment. So demographics do matter. And to talk about that topic, we have four guests that I'm pleased to introduce you to. So Dr. Hassan Radwan, you're the director of the School of Architecture, Planning and Design from the beautiful University of Mohamed VI Polytechnic. You're our host, basically. Next to you is Ana Paola Barreto. You're an emerging leader. You're an interning at the United Nations Human Rights Office of the Higher Commissioner, working specifically on gender, human rights, and advocacy. You're coming from Brazil. Welcome to you. Facing you, also coming from the university, Professor Fawzi Bakawi. You're the director of the Agriculture Department at the university. And next to you, last but not least, and Shimunya Hamukoma. You're the senior researcher, economist, and policy strategist at the Brenthurst Foundation from South Africa. Welcome to you. We're very pleased to have you.
Thank you.
Now, before we start, I want to remind you that we want you to jump in the conversation. Send us your question and your thoughts via Twitter using our hashtag AfriCanDo, or you can also direct message us. Before we start, I suggest we have a look at a few facts and figures.
21st century demographic trends. Let's get the facts. The world population is growing steadily by 79 million people per year, and our planet Earth is reaching its carrying capacity. The carrying capacity is the number of people and crops that can occupy a land without negatively affecting its ecosystem. Not all countries follow the same trends. Eastern Europe is depopulating fast because of low fertility and a negative migratory balance. On the other hand, other regions manage to regulate their numbers with balanced immigration policies adapted to their fertility trends. In Africa, the challenge is still there for some nations, whose populations might double by 2050. That is, unless changes are enacted to make fertility match the country's carrying capacity. Debate using the hashtag AfriCanDo.
So Ana Paola, we see that on one hand, Europe is aging, and across the sea in Africa, we're having a youth boom. Some say that it could be a mutually beneficial situation. But do you think that migration can actually offset North America, and Europe's aging population? And is it really the right way to see the problem?
Well, thank you for having me. I think that it's always important to start the conversation saying that migration is a human right, and since humans are on Earth, we migrate. And it's also important to take a look on evidence and different studies that show the positive impact of migration. So yes, I do believe that young people has a positive impact and a lot of things to contribute for the issue and the migration crisis.
Do you think, Dr. Radwan, that some experts are reading a lot into demographics? Some say that we would have in Europe a geriatric peace. Some say that there will be a generational revolt with a huge bulge in Africa. Of course, no one can forget about the Arab Spring. Do you think that political institutions are well equipped to face the demographic challenges?
First of all, we need to situate the demographics not only within the politics realm, because there are other dimensions into it. I think, what are politics? Politics are just a vehicle to manage a territory. So I don't think just the problem is just the question of politics, but is a question of reframing the policies in a holistic way to be more inclusive. And this is why, considering the large number of young people within this population and how can we predict the resolutions for the near future to include them. Therefore, I'm not pessimist. I don't talk about problems of the past of Africa, but I am more optimist, and therefore we need a discourse which is optimistic for the youth.
You believe that we have to have a positive view on it?
Yes.
We've been too negative?
Yes, we've been too negative because we are actually trapped by the negative images that were put on Africa, and even the international discourse with international organizations should change. In terms of human rights, in terms of pollution, in terms of unemployment, and we have all the slogans, they are negative, that are vehicled all around international organizations, including the United Nations. So we should not look at Africa just like a misery place, but we should look at it with its genius loci. That means what are the local potential based on centuries of know-how, and they think Africa has that memory that it needs to be awakened because now it's dormant, and to change, to shift the paradigm, the way we look at each other, and this is what we need to convey to the young generations of Africa.
Chimunya, I see you agreeing very much.
Very much so, very much so. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. So when you talk about demographic, we mentioned changing the narrative, but there's also social change and acceptability. For example, we see the populists in Europe rising and riding on the anti-immigration sentiment. Is it something that has to be taken into consideration? For example, do you think there's been, in South Africa also a strong anti-migrant sentiment? How do you think countries can accept and embrace migrations?
Well, I mean, I think following on what Anna Paula said, migration is something that's been happening since humans existed. And so a lot of the negative talk that we're hearing now is coming from a place of fear, but it shouldn't, because the data and the experiences of countries have been to grow through migration. Migration has such positive effects for development. If we look at the way that modern medicine developed developed across North Africa and in Arabic countries and moved towards the West, that was through migration. And migration is something that throughout history can show really positive effects.
Do you think that in a way we are not tapping enough into our history? Do you think that we are ignorant in a way?
Yes, I think in a lot of ways we're ignorant and we're also data poor. So what populist politicians are really good at doing is stirring up feelings, stirring up sentiment, and like touching the core of what we're afraid of. But what they forget to do is actually look at the facts and the information. So if we had to look at Europe, and if we had to look at America in particular, and look at the number of Fortune 500 countries that are currently headed by immigrants, that are headed by maybe first or second generation immigrants, we'd see that the result and the impact of immigrants, particularly in countries like America, has been extremely positive.
Monsieur Bekawi, the video mentions that our planet is reaching its carrying capacity. For those like me who didn't know, carrying capacity means the number of people and crops that can occupy a land without negatively affecting the ecosystem. So that's pretty crucial in a way. Now, demographics are indeed affecting agriculture. Can you tell us how? Because that's your core business.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, agriculture is basically growing food, animals to feed us. And the soil, for example, play an important role in growing plants. And soil has a health. It's just like humans. If you mistreat it, you won't get very good crops. So we need to manage the soil, for example. And if we are growing too much things, and we need to replace what we are taking out from the soil. So in some countries, for example, we put too much fertilizer, and that can affect negatively the environment. On the other hand, in other countries, and mostly in Africa, we don't put enough fertilizer, and we need to replenish what we're taking out. So that's one example of things that can affect negatively, basically, agriculture.
In a way, when we talk about migrations, we're talking about the rural exodus, and that affects tremendously the rural areas. How do you think agriculture can help regarding that migration, which is mainly internal? Contrary to the perception, most of the African migrants are not going north to Europe, they're actually migrating within Africa.
Well, we need, I mean, we need to basically to take care of more of the farmers. We need to improve their living conditions. We need to improve their profit, their benefits, so that they can stay in the farm and grow their family and be happy basically in the farm. And we need also to provide them with the tools so that they can improve their productivity and manage, and the tools also to manage their farm properly. So those are some of the examples we can do so that to maintain and keep the farmers staying in the farm.
Right. Because we moved on to Africa, I want to show you these videos with specific facts on the demographic situation on our continent.
Africa's growing population, is it a blessing or a curse? Today, there are 1.2 billion people in Africa. Thanks to better healthcare and high fertility rates, population in Africa is estimated to reach 2.5 billion people by 2050. Every day, 33,000 young Africans for a job. 60% of them end up unemployed. To turn its youth into an asset and unleash its formidable energy and creativity, Africa must empower them. Quality education must be ensured for all children, as well as professional training for young adults. Medical services have to follow along. Good governance and dynamic democratic systems are key to keeping the youth engaged politically. In order to build a thriving and inclusive economy which allows African countries to reap their demographic dividends, their youth has to be able to build the continent's prosperity. Learn the facts, join the debate using the hashtag AfriCanDo.
Dr. Hassan Hadwan, you're an architect by training, and the vast majority of rural migrants are not actually going to the next city, the biggest city. We're thinking Lagos, Cairo, when actually they're going very close to where they are, the closest, the nearest city. Do you think that those intermediate-sized, smaller cities are well prepared to adjust to that influx?
Thank you indeed for this question, because I think this is the most important part of the urbanization pace taking place in Africa. We should not forget in 2035, 50% of the population in Africa, they will be in cities. But this is not the issue for me. If I look at the map of Africa, the whole continent, 90–80% are in rural areas. So therefore, we need to change the dichotomy of urban-rural. It's been discriminative discourse. I think the future is the rural Africa, because in this rural Africa, where the real sustainability will be. Great cities in Europe, they are complaining because the metropolization have lost the sense of place, the sense of belonging, creativity, because cities, they become machines. So Africa is a virgin vehicle of what embracing the new era of sustainability, resilience, and smartness. I think the most important thing, not only intermediate cities as new opportunities to attract youth from rural areas, but also to enable rural areas to have their own comfort.
And you believe that we can create this new dynamic?
Yes.
Is it possible?
Indeed. We are in the time of connectivity. We are in the time of smart infrastructure. We don't need heavy structure cities, because we can have solar panels everywhere. Before, electricity needs to have stations and needs to have infrastructure. This city was heavy and expensive. Through smartness now, we can go to remote rural communities and enable them, bring them comforts that are maybe better than cities. You know, and this is, I think, what I think about the future. I think if we explore the rurality in Africa as a vehicle of sustainability, based on empowering community, based on a good governance, based on smart technology that is geared towards humans, not around gadgets. And I think the last part is about the right environment. We will see the reverse. I am optimistic that people from the city, they will migrate to the rural areas, not the opposite.
You're the revolution at this table. And Shimunya, you're heading the Standards Foundation Future of African Cities project. So basically, I saw you nodding, and I understand that you two are working together. The mass urbanization is actually still perceived as a nightmare scenario. And you know, we heard that something that we can turn things around. How can we make the mega cities good news? How can we transform them into an engine of growth? How can they absorb the migrations? Because still, you know, I think that rural areas could still retain and become engines of growth, but still there will be growth in the mega cities as well.
So I think one of the things that's really interesting about megacities across most of the continent is informality and the way that the informal economy works to absorb different kinds of skills and talent. And so I think that we should really stop thinking, when we think about economic growth, stop looking so much at formal jobs, because I read a statistic somewhere that I think like less than 50% of the young Africans entering the labor market will enter into formal jobs. So what we need to think about is how can we create and allow for that informality to capture that talent and to make that informality grow into sustainable, viable, healthy enterprises for families. So it's not just that small scale, one apple a day, a couple of onions and tomatoes, but really vibrant and thriving small businesses.
What is the proportion of the informal sector towards the normal sector, or the official one?
You know, I'm not sure of the exact data, but
would it be 2/3? I think it's the largest proportion. So actually on the continent, the informal sector is the norm.
It is.
If we look at the, I will come back
Please,
to you.
because I need to second what she said.
Please do, right away. And
I think what she's saying is very important. We need to look at what the role of urbanization in structural transformation of Africa. Urbanization of Africa was always leading to informality and was leading also to cities, dormitory cities. Enough of dormitory cities, but rather cities of opportunities. And informality is now sin. I think within informality there is an intelligence and smartness of communities that we need to explore for the future. Just to second what you said.
Fawza Bekawi, we talked about smart cities. You're talking about smart agriculture. That's your business. What is it?
Actually, I prefer to use another word than smart, because
Precision.
Smart may imply that our current farmers are not smart, and I like to use
true, very good
precision agriculture. And precision agricultures it's a new area in agriculture where we are developing tools that will help the farmers basically improve their revenue. I mean, all the farmers want is a good living and makes good profit so that they can take their kids to education, to have a good education, have good health. And some of the tools we are thinking about for the future is to allow the farmers to put, for example, the right amount of fertilizer, not to put too much because it will cost him or her too much money, but just put the right so that the productivity is good. And some examples also is putting the right amount of water. So we would use some sensors that can measure the amount of water in the ground, so that here again you put just the exact amount of water to the tree or to the plant. Those are some of the examples of precision agriculture that we're working on, and I believe in the future will be used by farmers.
It means massive investments. Is it an expensive?
It's a very good point. This is new technology, and in the beginning, like any other technology, will cost a lot of money, and small farmers in Africa in particular don't have a lot of resources. So what we need to do as scientists, researchers, is we need first of all to optimize these tools. We need to validate them. We need to do economic studies to show that they can be used and effectively by small. So we need to adapt them to the farmers. And the more farmers will use these tools, the more the cost will drop, like any other things in the economy.
We hear a lot about the green revolution that is needed for Africa. Do you think that the continent can leapfrog the way it did with the mobile technology and jump right into precision farming? Could it be an option?
Oh, of course, yes. I'm also very optimistic. In fact, Africa has the most land that could be expanded into agriculture. In other parts of the world, we used up what we could use in terms of land. In Africa, there's also a lot of potential to expand the farming land without affecting too much the environment. So I think these tools are going to help if they are used in the right way. And I think the farmers in Africa, with education, could become as
the agripreneurs. That's the new term. That the growth of the continent will be in agriculture.
And some of these future tools are very, very powerful, and I think they could help the farmers in Africa.
That's what we hope too. Ana Paula, you're working on the health needs of internal displaced and refugee women in Ethiopia. I think that's the theme of your thesis. Yeah. If we talk about migrations and demographics, they're actually turning the facts and figures upside down, because we know that authorities have to have some visibility and reliable demographic projections to serve the population and build the right infrastructures. How do you think that institutions can cope and transform their education and health systems accordingly? Do they manage to absorb that migration?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would like to start saying that it's very important when we talk about migration, we ask ourselves, who are we talking about? What are the background of these people? What are their careers, their dreams? It's important to have a human perspective when we're talking about migration.
Put a face and a name
absolutely.
And a personal
their
history.
Class, their background, where they're coming from. So when we are talking about migration, are we talking about the Europeans that live in Brazil? Are we talking about the Africans that are moving to Europe? Who are we talking about?
Some are migrants, others are expatriates.
Good.
We know the difference.
Yes.
What are the politics and who calls who has the power to call who what, right? So you mentioned, so 85% of the migrants in the world live in developing countries. And 2/3 of them migrate within its regions. So it's important to have this context. And related to the government and infrastructure, my thesis is exactly about how we can open space to communities that are directly affected by migration. So we can create policies that actually reflect their needs. So my question is exactly related to who knows what is my best need? The people that face it. I don't know what is the best policy for migration, but I'm pretty sure that an IGP person knows what is the best policy for them. So I think that it's also important to give voice to the people, to give them political power, so then we can reflect their needs on policies and infrastructure.
Right. So we have been receiving questions from the audience, and I'm going to throw them to you. I'm discovering them with you. So we had Abel, who sent a question from Addis Ababa. If our most brilliant citizens immigrate north while the total population keeps growing, how can we Africans hope to bridge the development gap? That's really the brain drain question.
Yes.
Are we? If you want to jump on it.
I think so. The structure of the brain drain is really changing in terms of like the development that we're seeing across the continent over like the last 10, 20 years. What you can do at home is so much more than what you can do abroad. So for a lot of very skilled Africans living in Africa and Africans from the diaspora, they're very keen to start working at home because the impact you can have in Africa is so much more.
You're betting on a return.
I'm betting on a return.
What about you?
I think to answer this question, we are in the right place as a response of this answer. We are at the University Polytechnique, Mohammed VI Polytechnique, that was actually designed for Africa. The question is, why this brain migrate and how we can get them back? It's not just about they are going, and this is why Mohammed VI Polytechnique University was designed and planned for such a purpose, to bring back those African brains. And this university is destined 60% to be hosting sub-African countries, and they think we should consider enabling new academic structures to train contextualized development. I think it's enough of recipes of developments coming from elsewhere. This is why the dream, we see it outside. So if we change the education system, the way we think about the development, and create structures like this one for research, innovation, and entrepreneurship, we are cultivating a new way of looking at Africa.
You're working on the African dream.
Yes.
Yes.
and as not as a dream, but as a dream to be true.
As a project.
To be true, yeah, in a very pragmatic way, yes.
And I think it's very important that there is this ambition on the continent, and,
yes.
and that is known to each and everyone here, but we are very busy spreading that word, which is very positive. Mr. Bekawi, when we talk about rural areas, we talked about agripreneurs, we talked about precision farming. Do you think that African leaders are on board? Are they really understanding the benefits of investing in agriculture?
Well, they should. If they are not, I don't know. I don't follow exactly every other countries, but I've been in a conference recently, African, in Nairobi, and it was represented by several deans and of colleges of agriculture, and I think everybody is aware that agriculture will play an important role for food security and peace too. So, and
yes,
the
there
right
is
thing,
a political dimension to
and
agriculture.
the right thing to do is to continue to invest and invest even more, I think, in agriculture and agricultural research, because I think by providing more revenues to the farmers, more stability, and more in better yield and quality of food, it would help country develop in Africa.
Ana Paula, you know, Brazil is a strong agricultural power. How do you think Africa can be inspired by the Brazilian model to change the narrative around agriculture?
I think this is so important. This one of my goals in Korea is exactly to promote South-South cooperation and how we can have better and stronger dialogues within ourselves. So we face similar challenges, the very similar challenges in Brazil and very several countries in Africa. But sometimes we are too used to look for the north for solutions. So I think it's very important for us to have dialogue within ourselves. And so I know that the BRICS has a bank to finance agricultural projects, food security projects. So I think that we need more of such an initiative.
That's what the Atlantic Dialogues are about, in
Absolutely.
a way. What are you expecting from the Emerging Leaders Program? Because that's basically about that key project to bring South-South partnerships to renew, create a space and a community for this sort of dialogue.
So today was just our first day of the conference, and thus far it's been fantastic. And what I'm most expecting and what I'm most seeing is new ways of thinking, new ways of thinking about problems. So we had a problem set about infrastructure this morning, and it turned into a beautiful discussion about infrastructure for societal change and what it means to change the logic of how we develop projects and how we develop infrastructure for people. And I don't know anywhere else where I'd have that kind of discussion.
Professor Radwan, I see you nodding. One last word?
Oh my goodness, I think it was a very good panel, very inspiring. What I would add, actually, I'm very pleased that all of us, we have the same discourse. That means there is a change in the state of mind about Africa. We believe again, yes, exactly. We believe again in Africa. I would just say, if we talk in terms of the potential of Africa, there is a potential, but it was driven outside. So in terms of resources, Africa is the most rich. In terms of youth, Africa is the most equipped. In terms of land is there. I think 4 elements that should be considered: governance, good governance and leadership, enabling communities to say their say, including the youth. Technology should be inclusive, not just imported gadgets, but should be embraced. And the last point is about environment, agriculture to be seen as a potential for the new era of sustainable development and not the opposite.
It's been a pleasure having you. I know that you're joining me to thank our guests, Nchimunya Hamukoma, Ana Paula Barreto, Dr. Hassan Radwan, Fauzi Bekawi. Thank you so very much for sharing your expertise with the AfriCanDo community. I want to invite you to join us tomorrow for another AfriCanDo debate that will be at 13:45 live again. We'll be discussing the climate crisis and the solutions for Africa. Don't forget to keep the conversation going. That will be with the hashtag AfriCanDo or the hashtag ADL 2018, that's on social media, or using at ATL_dialogues or at OCP Policy Center. I mean, you have it, you jump in, you keep the conversation going. Stay with us with AfriCanDo.